It was everybody. Of course, welcome to another episode of the Victorious Ones podcast, a place where gaming meets comics, meets sports, meets movies, along with music as well as inspiration. Of course, I'm your host, King Von Jr. King Von Jr. You can follow me on social media on Twitter at 301 King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Twitter page at Victory Pod One. I'm also on Instagram at Mr. King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Instagram, show's Instagram account at Victorious Ones Podcast. I'm also the social media producer for Perfect Plex Talk Radio, hosted by a friend of the program, Mike Knox. And so, sorry for this impromptu, urgent episode. And so I just came back from a concert celebrating, of course, one and only Anthony Brown, musician at my church, of course, well known. So, of course, happy birthday to him, ahead of time. But yeah, like I said, as far as that, been quite a, pretty eventful, if you will. I know this past weekend was a great weekend. Of course, this past Saturday, for the first time ever, believe it or not, I attended Baltimore Comic Con for the very first time. And so I'm not going to be with you long on this episode tonight, but yeah, do my best. But yeah, like I said, of course, I was at Baltimore Comic Con, this past Saturday, the very first time ever. I enjoyed it. I got a last minute ticket, but thank you very much, for the person who gave me the invite. And of course, I made sure to of course to deliver a podcast tonight. I want to be a man of my word. And so like I said, as far as that, I will say that this was a great convention. I just I had to kind of branch out a little bit more and venture into more of other conventions, because I'm so used to your awesome cons or blurred cons. Those are the main ones pretty much. So so as far as that, and like this is my third convention this year. I didn't do cosplay this time, but sometime next year I'm thinking about it, especially with with them doing a cosplay contest this past Saturday. I've seen very creative cosplayers. Like even though the venue, I guess the exhibit hall wasn't as wide, or at least wasn't as deep as, let's say, the Washington Convention Center. It was still spacious. It was a lot of comics for sure. AwesomeCon has that too, but I would say AwesomeCon is heavier into. I think they're heavier with cosplay, but even though they have a costume contest too, I think they're deeper into the cosplay. But I would say that when it comes to Artist Alley, Baltimore Comic Con may have the advantage in that. And of course, they certainly had some celebrity guests as well. You had the voice actors from for X-Men. You had Giancarlo Esposito. Of course, among several others. But yeah, like I said, it was excellent. Had a great time. It was better than I thought it would be. I know some people who've gone before, but I just wanted to kind of like branch out as far as that. Look forward to some more in the future. So those are my thoughts on that. Now, as far as of course, the NFL recap, of course, that this wouldn't be right of a podcast. If I didn't bring up the recap, all I have to say is, how about the Cowboys? So of course we dropped a double four on the Washington Commodores and put them in their place and let them know where they really stand when it comes to us. So of course this is the Week 7 recap as I'm going to give. As far as this past Thursday Night Football, the Bengals defeat the Steelers 33-31. That was actually my prediction. The Rams blew out the Jaguars. Great job. 35-7. The Eagles defeat the Vikings 28-22. Great for my fantasy points. So of course the Patriots defeat the Titans 31-13. The Panthers beat the Jets 13-6. The Browns destroyed the Dolphins 31-6. The Bears defeat the Saints 26-14. The Chiefs blow out the Raiders 31 to absolutely nothing. The Colts defeat the Chargers 38-24. Of course, the Broncos defeat the Giants 33-32. You know what I mean? Russell definitely took quite a few hits. Um, but yeah, of course, the Packers defeat the Cardinals 27-23. Cowboys put that belt to the behind to Washington 44-22. You know what I mean? Of course, the 49ers defeat the Falcons 20-10, as I expected. San Fran doing a lot with very little. The Lions defeat the Buccaneers on Monday Night Football 24-9. People want to make these analogies saying that Baker Mayfield is better than Josh Allen. I don't know where they came up with that. Clearly didn't show on Monday. And so, of course, the second Monday Night Football game, of course, the Seahawks defeat the Texans 27-19. So that's the recap of this week in the NFL. And so now, of course, another thing I want to mention is that the Toronto Blue Jays are the ALCS champions, and they are on their way back to the World Series for the first time since '93. A long time. But yeah, like I said, of course, they're going to meet up with, as funny as the Los Angeles Dodgers. And the funny thing about this is, certain very high-profile hip-hop rivalry that happened last year. You know what I mean? So now, the funny thing about it is that, this is, I guess, going to reignite, the memes, if you will, of Kendrick versus Drake, because obviously Drake is from Toronto, Blue Jays, and Kendrick's from Los Angeles, the Dodgers. So it's like, oh, here we go again. You know what I mean? Kendrick literally has a song called Dodger Blue, of course, on his latest album. You know what I mean? So I find it very funny, very fascinating that, that those particular teams in the World Series, you know what I mean? It's like a Hollywood scriptwriter came up with this. You know what I mean? It's just like, where the jokes write themselves. And the memes are going to be flying. So if anything, congrats to Vlad Jr., but, not in this case. Not, at least not at the expense of, the good old Dodgers. So I'm going for the Dodgers to take it all back to back. That's just my prediction. But also another thing of course, in sports news, the NBA has returned to NBC, and they came out swinging. It was cinema. It was pure, absolute cinema last night that the NBA has officially returned to NBC, its rightful place. And so of course, Michael Jordan had his insight of excellence, interview segment, whatever. Of course, on NBC, they say he was going to be a contributor anyway. He mentioned how he hadn't picked up a basketball in years. More than likely, it's probably because of it, after Kobe's untimely passing. It's probably felt kind of down and out. Maybe I wouldn't be surprised. But given the occasion, I'm pretty sure Jordan is still going to of course, I never count him out. So more likely Steph is still going to have the ability to drop buckets anyway, any given moment, any given time. So in the opening games of the season, we had back-to-back Western Conference games. The OKC Thunder had the ring ceremony at home against the Houston Rockets, the revamped Rockets with Kevin Durant. A team full of absolute giants and titans for real. Might as well be the Attack on Titan team. Because so many of them over 6'7", nearly 7 foot, just about. You know what I mean? Like, just put a lineup of another Hakeem Olajuwons and Yao Mings, and that's what you would get with this Rockets team, basically. And they went to double overtime, and the OKC Thunder, happened to get pulled up the other W. You know what I mean? And so, it was a shootout, 125-124 in 2 overtimes. Following that was the Lakers versus Warriors, and the Warriors ended up winning 119-109. So it was Luka, it's the one-man show going solo without LeBron for the first game of the season, and of course, Luka dropped like 43. You know what I mean? So as far as that, pretty much, go show that we definitely need more help. But as far as like I said, as far as the Rockets, of course, Sanguine, Alperian had led with 39 points. KD had 23. For the Thunder, SGA had 35. Chet Holmgren had 28. My man Chet Holmgren was talking big trash. Of course, with Vince Carter, Carmelo Anthony, and Trace McGrady, interviewing him. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, this, like as far as like pre-game or post-game show, and him, go to the commentary table and flash that ring in front of him. That's what I'm talking about, Chet. He's hilarious. It's become one of my favorite players now, just off that alone. Yeah. Excuse me. Anyway, but as far as that, so I've covered all those things. Now it is time to get into, the main thing. These Marvel Runs memes are nasty work right now. As soon as I open up my IG, but anyway, but outside that, I will say, when it comes to, I'm gonna do my best to kind of like, keep the program running, if you will. But in terms of just a few things I have to get off my chest, WWE has been hit, with the injury bug, quite a bit lately. But this past Friday Night SmackDown, it's of course the post Crown Jewel show, if you will, and so of course announced in advance with Jacob Fatu versus Drew McIntyre. It looks like Jacob was written off because of an injury. I guess you have the women's tag team championship match between Charlotte Flair and Alexa Bliss versus Soruka and Zarya, and we see Cody making an appearance. Of course, Cody kicks off SmackDown after losing to Seth Rollins. Of course, he immediately addressed his loss to Rollins Crown Jewel before setting sights on this week's show, and of course, the aforementioned number one contenders match. Cody said that, like the fans, he would sit back and watch the showdown between Drew McIntyre and Jacob Fatu as they fought to be his next challenger. And of course, Cody said that Seth Rollins split himself to the bone to beat him, perhaps hinting at an arm injury that could keep the Visionary out of action. It was very uneventful, if you will. Not too much, to talk about as far as that. Backstage, we saw the Solo and MFT's Bully Ray Phoenix likely setting up a match later on. Next up, we have Charlotte Flair and Alexa Bliss, AOC, Allies of Convenience versus Soruka and Zarya. And the winners of this match, and still, your women's tag team champions, of course, Charlotte Flair and Alexa Bliss. The biggest story to come out of this, unfortunately, was Soruka's injury. But of course, so of course, of course, it was a very unfortunate situation. Of course, eventually with Charlotte locking the figure eight, to capture the win and make her tap out. But of course, it was a situation where the momentum came to an end with the tag. Soruka went on to fight off both champions, and of course, a double champion, rocked Charlotte with a soul snatcher, only for Alexa Bliss to break up the pin. The action spills out to the floor, where Blake Monroe distracts Soruka, allowing for Charlotte to capitalize and take out the knee. But of course, it was just an unfortunate freak accident, for Soruka, and more on that later. We see congratulations to Ilya Dragunov, who made his long-awaited return and capitalized and defeated Sami Zayn to become the new United States champion in an open challenge. So of course this was a long-awaited return and a much-deserved win. So it couldn't have happened to a better guy. The Motor City Machine Guns, Mid-City Machine Guns versus Los Garza, and the winners of this match, the Machine Guns. We have Cody Rhodes versus Drew McIntyre. As McIntyre defeats Cody by way of DQ. And of course, before Jacob could even make his entrance, the cameras caught him lying out backstage as a result of a sneak attack. So it's clear that they were not able to compete, and they're saying that Jacob's going to be sidelined well into next year. Um, yeah, it's a devastating blow. But the highlight of this night was was the return of Ilya Dragunov. You know what I mean? That was I was just floored by that. That was the highlight. That was he was the MVP that night. And then of course now it's time to go into Monday Night Raw. Quite a few things to say about this. To say the least. Um, mm, mm, mm. Good old Monday Night Raw. This is the aftermath of Seth, the visionary being attacked and being sidelined. So the matches, of course, lined up for the show with the Women's Intercontinental Championship match, Maxine Dupree versus Becky Lynch. We have the IC title match, Dirty Dom versus Rusev. The World Tag Team Championship match, AJ Styles and Dragon Lee take on Finn Balor and JD McBobblehead. And we have a promo from Braun Breaker, Bronson and Paul Heyman to kick off the show. And then we have an updated World Heavyweight Champion Seth Rollins as the Vision interrupted Adam Pearce. And so is Raw General Manager Adam Pearce. Excuse me. Yes, of course, he took to the ring to make an announcement on of course, on update of Seth Rollins' injury. He was interrupted by the Vision, if you will. But of course, Adam Pearce revealed that Seth Rollins is fresh out of a major surgery and missed a considerable amount of time. And so Pearce announced he was removing the World Heavyweight title, the championship, away from the Visionary and relinquishing it, vacating it for a battle royal. As that will be held later on to determine who will face CM Punk for the gold at Saturday Night's Main Event on November 1st. And so of course, like I say, this one, the Vision interrupted. And of course, Adam Pearce ordered Braun Breaker to hand over the world title, and to which Braun responded, "What if I don't?" And so after some, of course, Adam Pearce, demanded him to say please in return for the world title, and of course, for Pearce to receive the belt, and of course only for Paul Heyman to grab the microphone and said that he did not leave Roman Reigns and betray Punk at WrestleMania 41 to side with Rollins, but rather because he knew Breaker and Reed were the future of the business. So really, Paul Heyman did it more so, as I figured it would be, more so for the benefit in the long term to elevate Braun Breaker and Bronson Reed. But he just happened to make it obvious. Thank you very much, Captain Obvious. So clearly Seth Rollins was not going to be Paul Heyman's long-term investment. He was not going to be the centerpiece Paul Heyman guy that Brock Lesnar, CM Punk, and Roman Reigns were. You know what I mean? So Seth Rollins, I knew from the jump, I was like, yeah, this ain't gonna be, he's not gonna be the same level of a Heyman guy as those other three were, because unfortunately, clearly, as it shows, when you look at Rollins' track record, he's just not able to, not able to maintain his health. He's not able to stay healthy. And so of course, it's just unfortunately history repeats itself because because the thing about it is that because of the fact that this same time around the same time 10 years ago, Seth had his first major injury that sidelined him. And, of course, that's when he was the WWE champion, and it just so happened that the first injury took place after after he cashed in the briefcase, and in that case, he was champ for about 6 months roughly, but before he ended up getting injured at the house show against Kane, and of course he ended up missing WrestleMania 32 in Dallas. So that was a devastating setback for him. So it just so happened that the second time Rollins, 10 years later, second time, Rollins ends up getting the briefcase and cash in. his title reign ends with another injury, and it's just pretty crazy that this that not only did Seth win off the cash in, but he also faked an injury before that cash in. You know what I mean? So it's just like, I don't know. It's just something you just don't really want to play with like that. It just so happens. It's very unfortunate, and it's just like that Roman Reigns promo, continues to age, like the finest wine, if you will. Just go to show anytime, they put the rock on Seth, like put the company on his shoulders, his body starts, doesn't hold up like that, sadly. But yeah, like as far as that, and then of course, Paul Heyman just goes in on Seth Rollins, and of course after running off Rollins' previous nicknames, saying he was neither of them. He called the visionary a bum shoulder and declared this a revision of the future. So it sounds like Paul Heyman is, somebody who has buyer's remorse, if you will. Great opening segment, as far as that's concerned. Then, of course, afterwards, we also see, AJ Styles and Dragon Lee versus Judgment Day, and the winners of this match and the new World Tag Team Champions, phenomenal AJ Styles and Dragon Lee. And of course, after AJ, drops Finn Balor with a Styles Clash for the win. And of course, side note, I know I didn't mention it last week, but shout out to Lids. It was really cool, embroidery. Like I said, this cool Shawn Michaels hat. Cool. Shawn Michaels hat that they made. That they had it embroidered since they have a deal. Not to give a cheap plug in, but yeah, like I said, since I have a deal with WWE, had them make a Shawn Michaels hat for me. The embroidery. I was like, it's pretty cool. Shout out to HBK. But yeah, like I said, of course, back to the program. Like I said, as far as that, we see that that AJ and Dragon Lee are the World Tag Team Champions, and so we see that Judgment Day's tension starting to build out of the head. You could definitely see Judgment Day starting to crumble and implode even more since they don't have any more titles. So eventually it's going to Roxanne attempting to smooth things over with Dirty Dom to continue that story thread. Eventually going to set up for Liv Morgan's return. So we could definitely see the Judgment Day finally crumble once and for all. Then next up we have the Intercontinental Championship match, Dominic Mysterio, the IC champion, Triple H champion. Of course, defeat Rusev. Of course, all we're not. So, and of course, not only that, but of course, like Islam, like I said, as far as that, Dirty Dom defeats Rusev, and also for the women's Intercontinental Championship match, we have Maxine Dupree get another title shot against Becky Lynch, and of course, this is in Maxine's hometown of Sacramento. It's whatever. Maxine wins by disqualification. Becky still holds the title. And we have Stephanie Bakir versus Roxanne Perez. Obviously, La Primera is the winner. And last but not least, this is where things really take a turn. We have a battle royal to determine CM Punk's opponent at Saturday night's main event. In the wake of Seth Rollins' injury, and having to forfeit the title. And of course the competitors include Rusev, Ivar, Grayson Waller, Kofi Kingston, Dominic Mysterio, Finn Balor, JD McBobblehead, Akira Tozawa, Otis, El Grande Americano, of course, aka Luke Kaiser. We all know Penta, Jey Uso, Jimmy Uso, LA Knight, AJ Styles, Dragon Lee, and Sheamus. So of course we see CM Punk join the commentary team, for this match, scouting his potential opponents at Saturday night's main event. And the winner of this match, last eliminated Dirty Dom, was none other than Jey Uso. You know what? I know he's got the popularity. I know people love to say Yee, and all this other stuff. But at a certain point, it's just like, do we really, really, really need it? Um, hmm. And Jey Uso has been getting roasted online, especially with these comparisons to Mercedes Moné. Um, and I'm like, I don't know where you get the comparisons from, because, I know Mercedes got 14 million belts, but at least she has a great catalog of matches, and she could definitely go in the ring. You know what I mean? She's one of the all-time top tier women's wrestlers inside the square circle. Just from an overall body work standpoint, she has stamped her place in history. You know what I mean? She's a world-class, all-time great women's wrestler, right? Regardless of the promotion. CEO, CEO, as we say on Purple Place, CEO. You know what I mean? So, she's earned them stripes. Meanwhile, with Jey, it's just like, this is a situation you could tell where, he was just thrown to the fire, um, without being fully prepared. It was already exposed on, WWE Unreal, that of course, Triple H himself admitted that Jey really wasn't all that ready. And it was very obvious, like they even, mentioned how, pointed out how, how Jey gets out of breath, when he's, run those ropes and things like that. You can tell he's winded. Um, you know, his move set is very limited, but but because it was for the sake of WrestleMania cash grab, for the sake of moving merchandise, they put the rocket on him and had to beat John Cena, have that feel good, Royal Rumble moment and things like that, like as far as that payoff, if you will, what I mean, like trying to recreate the Batista 2005 moment, whatever. Um, what I mean, but I guess just because he was super popular, and in terms of like the catchphrase and the merchandise, that's really what it was. Um, but outside of that, once the bell rings, there's a lot left to be desired. Um, so for the sake of that, I mean, like I said, obviously he has a limited move set, like outside of the super kick and the splash, the spearing, all that great. Um, what I mean? So, they're trying to make him another tribal chief, but, I don't think he really got it in terms of, the leadership standpoint when it comes to his ring generalship. I've talked about this before, but yeah, like I said, in terms of that, it's just like, you just throwing them in there unprepared, what I mean? Like, it's like taking, food out of the microwave or the oven too early, just prematurely. There's still, some cold areas, you know, uh, you know, right underneath, that still need to be heated. And that's how Jey is when it comes to, that, when it comes to filling those blanks in the ring. Um, what I mean? It's just like, and like that, like I said, he's just reduced to being a caricature, if you will. Um, and so he's already been in this position. Wasn't really moving the needle. Like I said, it was just for the sake of a WrestleMania cash grab. Because Gunther wasn't going to be selling out merchandise like that. But he's a far better um, wrestler in between them ropes, far more technical, way more polished than Jey would ever be. And Jey couldn't even get a decent match out of his own brother at WrestleMania. So, like, what are we talking about here? So it's just force feeding somebody who's, been given way too much and not really someone who can really handle all that. So those are my thoughts as far as Jey being in the title picture. And really, I think I would say that it's time for more of a younger movement, because I mean that's the whole point of them developing new talent, especially coming out of NXT. What I mean? So if there's anybody who I would invest in the long term to be some of the next main event stars, especially on Raw, especially particularly Dirty Dom and Braun Breaker. I mean? So I would say that those guys will really, really, maximize opportunity like that, even better than what Jay could do right now. So like as far as that's concerned, it's just like and plus LA Knight's not that much better anyway. He's further in his 40s than Jay is. CM Punk is not too far away from the exit, from making his exit, himself. You know what I mean? So it's just like come on, it's just time to inject new life. Of course, John Cena is literally on his way out the door. After December 13th, AJ Styles already announced that 2026 is going to be his last year. Last year, Randy Orton, winded down his career. Brock Lesnar winded down his career. All these different things. You know what I mean? Seth Rollins, being injury riddled. Kevin Owens, dealing with career-threatening injuries himself. It's just like the scene when it comes to the veterans is very depleted. But the thing is, Paul Levesque, as somebody says on YouTube, he just not willing to pull the trigger on the next generation. The next one's in line. You got Montez waiting in the wings, for that moment, to really strike. Because, I firmly believe that again, Montez is what they want Jay to be. Is that they wish Jay could be, but that, I digress. That's another story. Last but not least, of course, I'm going to mention NXT, and kicking off NXT, they were, this main announcement of Soul said that Soul was going to be making, a big announcement, going to NXT. And I'm just going to get it out the way. So Ruka announced that she would vacate, the NXT Women's North American Championship as well as the Women's Speed Championship. And so, so instead Zarya, will be taking her place to defend those titles. And, to defend the Women's North American Championship in her honor against Blake Monroe. And so, was going into Halloween Havoc coming up. And so yes, that's what it is. And this is, just another issue when it comes to, the injury bug. It's been biting, especially the women's division. They're in shambles. Whether it's Bianca, whether it's on the main roster, Bianca being out, Jade being out. I just found out something about, allegedly, apparently, Rhea being injured. Liv Morgan, obviously, is out. So the women's division is devastating now. So Ruka is out. So that's why, as I said on Twitter, it's just like, that they are, that this division is hanging on by a thread anytime Maxine is getting the title shot against Becky Lynch. So that tells you everything. So unfortunately, there's another one who gets bit by the bug. So, the state of the women's division, it's ain't looking too bright right now. The prospects ain't prospecting right now. But as far as and back to NXT, contract signed between Ricky Saints and Trick Williams. When I say that Ricky went in on Trick, read him for filth, he absolutely did. So I cannot wait for this Halloween Havoc match. I know they're going to tear the house down. Man, what I mean? Come on now. It's just like they do not waste time at all. Hold on. Here's my Chick-fil-A. Yeah, that's mine. Yeah, I'll get it after finish. But anyway, like I said, of course, we see that the color made their entrance, and we saw that the number one contender Tatum Paxley got "You Deserve a Chance." Of course, only to be met by Fatal Influence, and she's gonna go 1-on-1 against JC Jane for the NXT Women's Championship. And so as far as that, obviously the table's being set for that. And we see Stax Lorenzo versus Leon Slater, for the TNA X Division Championship. And I can't wait to see what Leon Slater and Javon Evans, are really capable of, when they team up together. Because I know that they could certainly be dance partners. And the thing is, Javon Evans, his upside is so high. Like, his trajectory is absolutely off the charts. You know what I mean? Javon Evans is meant for so much more, so much bigger. And I know on Monday, Mike and I, and a few others, we talked about, as far as the way that black male wrestlers are being booked on NXT versus the main roster, and just that culture clash between Triple H and Shawn Michaels in terms of the way they see things. But that's another story. But Javon Evans is definitely one of those breakout stars from NXT that has that trajectory. Like I said, he's, excuse the expression, he's the YN123 kid basically. And so it's in terms of his athleticism, in terms of what he does in the ring, as far as his skill set, that's gonna be polished more and more as time goes on. But he definitely has that connection. Javon has that it factor. You know what I mean? You can make a case and say that he has, he has the capability to be up there with Melo, if not surpass him altogether at some point. Over Femi, what you get out of him. You know what I mean? So, but of course, Trick Williams is him as well. But Javon Evans, that's the now in the future. But other than that, like I said, of course, Leon Slater wins with a 450 splash, retaining the TNA X Division Championship. And after the match, Leon and Javon get in the ring, and Javon gets on the mic and puts him over before getting excited about Halloween Havoc. And so, after that, we see Mr. Guana and La Parka, of course, show up. And so, of course, Guana asks if you're really going to have Halloween Havoc without La Parka and Mr. Guana and Leyeska. And of course, they spoke to Ava Rain, and she had the great same idea. They've got a tag match for Halloween Havoc. And Triple A has taken over Mexico, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas on Saturday. The Prescott Valley follows. And so, of course, it's going to be Arizona. So we're going to have Mr. Juan and La Parka versus Leon Slater and Javon Evans. I cannot wait. I'd rather see Halloween Havoc than Saturday's main event at this point. We have Jasper Troy versus Zachary Wentz, the Speedman's Championship #1 contenders match. Jasper Troy wins by pinfall after with the Boss Man Slam. And so of course, Dark State did a promo vignette that the Hardy Boys interrupted, and so I'm looking forward to Dark State versus the Hardy Boys. So next coming up. And so after that, we see Ava Rain in the ring with Zaruka. And of course, we see that Soul Ruka had to relinquish her championship. Of course, Blake Monroe, we definitely look forward to taking that title from her. Only for Zarya to get the upper hand on her, and drops Blake with F5. We see Axiom versus Sean Legacy for the Speed Men's Championships. And so, of course, Axiom wins by pinfall with Avalanche Spanish Fly, Hank and Tank versus OTM. The winners of this match by pinfall, OTM. And we have Fatal Influence versus the Culling. Fatal Influence won by pinfall, the rolling elbow from JC Jane on Tatum Paxton. And so that is it. And I am certainly looking forward to Halloween Havoc, even more so than Saturday's main event. And what I mean. So that's really what it is right now. And so that's pretty much it. This was very, very impromptu, pretty brief. Of course, a podcast episode. I don't want to be long-winded, but also I want to give birthday shout-outs. On October 20th, Razor Ramon Scott Hall would have turned 67. Snoop Dogg turned 54. Chavo Guerrero Jr. turned 55. D'Lo Brown turned 55 as well. October 22nd, Anthony Brown turns 44. And of course, Nina Parker turns 46. October 24th, of course, October 25th, Monica turns 45. Drake turns 39. Braun Breaker turns 28. Monica McNutt turns 36. Of course, Jalen Ramsey turns 31. October 25th, Bootsy Collins turns 74. October 26th, CM Punk turns 47. And Angela Rye turns 46. And that's it for the birthdays. And before I go, I would like to give a word of wisdom is that, you know, um, when you are discarded by others, that's that gives room for God to discover you. You know what I mean? So like you may be disrespected by man, discarded by man, but of course, God discovers you, and of course, and of course, uses that rejection, you know, uh, use that rejection to elevate you, to your journey. And so the thing is, like, of course, it's my pastor preach, don't sweat the player haters. You know what I mean? And so it's just like of course, when you're discouraged, dismayed, disapproved, it means God is about to discover you. You know what I mean? So when you're disrespected, disapproved, discouraged, dismayed, prepare to be discovered and launched into your destiny. And also always remember that, of course, you are victorious because greater is He that is in you than He that's in the world. When you put God in first place, you don't have to worry about being in last place. Please make sure to listen to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else that you download podcasts. It's also available on YouTube as well, youtube.com/at West Virginia. Please make sure to like, subscribe for more great content, and please make sure to head over to to our Big Cartel, our website, for new podcasts, merchandise, of course, podcast hoodie, as well as really cool, t-shirts as well, for all my NBA fans and WWE fans. You definitely will not be disappointed. Please make sure to, check that out and support the brand, if you will. But yeah, like I said, of course, like I said, that does it, for tonight's episode. And always remember that to let this day be the very best day of your life.